I've been covering exam stories for years now, but I've never seen an exam story quite like this. The 2026 NEET exam in India has been making headline news all around the world, and that's not a very common thing for an exam to do. NEET is India's national medical entrance examination, and on the 3rd of May this year, more than 2 million students sat down to take it. But 9 days later, the entire exam was cancelled. Evidence emerged that some of the real test questions had been circulating before the exam, and so every candidate was told that their first attempt would no longer count and they would need to resit an entirely new exam. That left India with just under 6 weeks to organise one of the largest exam resits in history, and the chaos surrounding it has turned into one of the largest controversies in the history of their education system. A new paper had to be written and translated, and the 2 million students needed to re-prepare and get themselves back to exam centres, and the authorities had to convince everyone that the second paper would remain secure. The re-exam took place on the 21st of June, but the controversy didn't end when the students put their pens down. In fact, it's grown into protests on the streets, demands for the resignation of India's education minister, and even a currently ongoing hunger strike. So as an outsider, I wanted to try and understand how questions from such a heavily guarded exam could be leaked, and why this has grown to become about much more than just an exam. These are some of the questions from the original exam in May. These photos were uploaded after the exam. NEET contains physics, chemistry, and biology. Students answer 180 multiple choice questions in just over 3 hours. They receive 4 marks for a correct answer, but lose 1 mark for every incorrect answer, and that's to discourage people from guessing. A single question like this might not seem too bad, particularly if you have studied this topic, but the challenge is answering question after question under time pressure while knowing that a single mark could move you thousands of places in the rankings. These chemistry questions are particularly interesting because chemistry would become central to the cheating investigation. To understand why this story hits so hard in India, you need to understand the stakes of this exam. NEET is not simply an exam that determines whether you pass or fail a school subject. It is the main gateway into undergraduate medical education across the country. More than 2 million candidates compete, but only about 5 or 6% of them will obtain a spot in medical college. In previous videos on my channel, I've called NEET one of the most competitive exams in the world. Security is tight for the exam. Question papers are transported in GPS-enabled vehicles with police escorts. There are CCTV feeds from the examination centres sent back to a central control room. Candidates pass through metal detectors, and there's also biometric authentication to prevent impersonation. For many candidates, becoming a doctor represents much more than just a personal career choice. It can offer financial security, social status, and the chance to change the circumstances of an entire family. Therefore, families might spend years paying for tuition, coaching institutes, and repeated attempts at the exam. Some students move to cities within India that are famous for their exam coaching, and they'll probably spend most of their teenage years inside these classrooms. So NEET was already psychologically brutal before the government told millions of students that their first exam results meant nothing. Before the exam, a large document with over 400 practice questions was circulating. This is known as a guess paper and is pretty common in exam preparation. Teachers study past papers and the official syllabus and then try to guess which topics or questions might come up. So a guess paper with a few questions that are similar to the real exam wouldn't prove anything, but this paper appeared to guess far too well. More than 120 of the practice questions in this paper appeared to perfectly match questions in the real NEET exam. After the exam on the 3rd of May, a whistleblower who had almost by chance been shown these papers and recognized that they were way too similar to the real exam, well, he took those guess papers to his local police station, but they let him go, telling him he would need to submit a formal written complaint. If he had left it be, then maybe none of this would have come to light. But on May 7th, he decided to try again and sent an email to the National Testing Agency, also known as the NTA. That email triggered a cascade of events. 5 days later, the NTA announced that the examination could not be allowed to stand. The entire exam was cancelled, and the case was referred to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Cancelling the exam meant imposing real costs onto millions of innocent students, but the NTA said that allowing the existing process to continue would further damage public trust. The NTA said that it would refund fees from taking the exam, but you can't refund the psychological experience of believing that the most important exam of your life is finally over, only to have to snap back into preparing for it all over again. Investigators could see that the exam questions had reached students through coaching classes, handwritten notes, private messages, and WhatsApp groups. But those networks still needed a source, so investigators started working backwards from the students who had received the questions to people who may have had a chance to see the exam before it was printed. And it turns out one of the key people involved in the leak came from the inside. The exam is offered in 12 Indian languages, so the NTA appoints translators for all 3 subjects, but there are 2 translators for each language, one to translate it into that language and the other to translate it back, ensuring that no meaning is lost. There's about 24 people involved in the translation in total, but every additional person with access to the exam introduces an extra point of possible failure. On the 15th of May, the Central Bureau of Investigation announced the arrest of chemistry lecturer P.V. Kulkarni. He was one of the translators and also involved in question writing. The CBI alleges that during the final week of April, Kulkarni organised special coaching classes at his home with the help of a co-conspirator. Students were allegedly recruited for these sessions and paid several 100,000 rupees to attend, or a few $1,000s. Investigators claim that in these lessons, Kulkarni dictated questions, answer options, and the correct answers, while students copied them into notebooks. Those notebooks have become key pieces of physical evidence. The handwritten questions were compared with the real NEET exam and exactly tallied with it. Investigators face the problem of working out who had knowingly bought leaked questions, but multiple people were profiting from the sale of the leaked questions, and there have been 13 arrests so far, including various teachers and coaches. Cancelling the exam meant that the NTA now had to write, translate, print and distribute an entirely new exam to over 2.2 million students, and it had to do it quickly enough as to not delay medical admissions by an entire year. The new exam was scheduled for the 21st of June, and there were strong security measures, just like for the May exam. Plus, the Indian Air Force helped transport question papers to different locations around the country. The entire operation had the intensity of moving state secrets. But GPS trackers and police escorts can only stop people looking at the papers on the downstream end of the process. They cannot protect questions that have already been copied by someone involved in creating or translating them. So the NTA also replaced the people involved in setting and translating the questions. The re-exam had to be protected at both ends of the process. Question setters worked in secure rooms without internet, and they weren't allowed to take in their phones or laptops. Then, only days before the re-exam, another problem emerged. Channels on Telegram were claiming that they could sell students access to the new paper. These reportedly included channel names like Private Mafia, with many groups asking for large payments. But a channel claiming to have a leaked paper does not mean that it actually has it. Once millions of students know that an exam has already leaked before, scammers have an ideal audience. They can sell a fake paper or an old paper or any random collection of questions under the claim that it is the real one. The Indian government argued that Telegram's anonymity and the ease with which blocked channels could be recreated meant that Telegram was too susceptible to cheating and scams. So, India temporarily blocked Telegram until the 22nd of June, the day after the re-exam. Telegram's founder argued against the ban, saying that it punished ordinary users, and many people thought it was a disproportionate restriction on free speech that didn't address the source of the leak anyway. But the government said it was a last resort after attempts to take down the offending content had failed. The re-exam went ahead on the 21st of June. This copy of the re-exam paper was published by Arkash, a coaching institute. There is currently no confirmed evidence that the replacement paper was leaked, and the results are due to be released on July 20th. But this was only the beginning of further unrest for India's youth. This was the first time that the exam needed to be resat, but India had already experienced a major NEET controversy back in 2024. That exam involved a confirmed leak that affected some students, but the Supreme Court concluded there was not enough evidence of a system-wide breach to cancel the entire exam. In fact, there are often exam cheating scandals in India. NEET questions were also said to be leaked in 2021 and 2016, and it seems that the examination system under the Modi government has become associated with disorder, distrust, and chaos. This reset process was highly traumatic for students, and reportedly some candidates took their own life in the stress of it all. For some, they felt they had done well on the first exam and couldn't face the idea of doing it again with an uncertain outcome. There are students who often feel that their entire life depends on the outcome of these exams. Around the same time this was unfolding, Surya Kant, India's Chief Justice, made some remarks comparing India's unemployed youth to cockroaches.
There are youngsters like cockroaches. They don't get any employment.
India does have an unemployment crisis despite high education rates, but people heard these comments about them and felt like it's not their fault, rather it's the result of a system designed to keep them powerless. That anger became attached to a new political movement called the Cockroach Janta Party, or CJP. They took that cockroach name and made it their own. The group was founded by Abhijit Diptka as a satirical online movement claiming to represent young people who felt ignored, overworked, or treated as disposable by the political system. The eligibility requirements initially said that you needed to be lazy, unemployed, and chronically online. But the joke rapidly developed a serious audience. The CJP has gained nearly 22 million followers on Instagram in the last couple of months. They are currently protesting and demanding the resignation of India's education minister. CJP's argument is that arresting teachers and middlemen is not enough. If national exams repeatedly failed, then responsibility needed to reach the people in charge. The protest escalated recently when activist Sonam Wangchuk joined it. On the 28th of June, he started a hunger strike in New Delhi alongside a CJP protest. As of the 15th of July, Wangchuk has entered the 18th day of the strike and was reported to have lost 8.5 kilograms. Opposition leaders and supporters are urging him to stop because of the risk to his health, but he is continuing to demand the education minister's resignation. The CJP is also preparing a march towards Parliament on the 20th of July, so this year's exam in India has grown into a national conversation about responsibility, youth unemployment, and whether public institutions can still be trusted to reward hard work fairly. And this story does not really have an ending yet. The criminal investigation, protests, and the hunger strike are all still developing. The students have now completed the exam twice, but the harder test might be whether India's education system can prove it can be trusted. Thanks to my Patreon supporters and channel members for making this video possible, and a special shout out to today's Patreon cat of the day, Barney.